How do we respond? What can we do about it? We've got the moral call. We've got the scientific basis. What do we do about it? The first is a lifestyle change. Now, we don't want to really point fingers at anybody because we're going to have to point them at ourselves. The United States of America is probably the biggest per capita consumers of stuff and of fossil fuels. So we don't want to point the fingers at the Chinese. We don't want to point the fingers at other people. It's us. We're going to point the fingers at each other. What do? The first thing, and Pope Francis tells us, we've got to change our lifestyle. Okay? He says we consume too much and it doesn't lead to a better life. We've got it caught in consumerism. And we've seen that. We know that. The School Sisters of Notre Dame have been living it, of reducing, living on the right way. So thank you, sisters. The rest of us have to take some lessons. We got to change the light bulbs. We got to get better insulation. We got to drive less. We got to fly less. The next time you buy a car, consider miles per gallon as one of the most important things. Really good stuff to do. Buy less. How many times do we have to buy things and then go out and rent a storage locker because our garage is already full and the basement's full and we got to put some stuff out there? We got to consume less. The second point is even harder, and that's we've got to put on a new mindset. Pope Francis calls it conversion. He's calling us to conversion. And it's conversion away from the idolatry of stuff. That we need to find our satisfaction and the fullness of life in our relationships, in our prayer, in our quiet time. Get away from the screen, get closer to the people that you live with. In terms of the environmental conversion, we've got to understand that this is my problem to solve. It's my problem. I've created it. We've created it. And collectively, we've got to put on some new mental attitudes to help change that. Well, what does that look like? Here's an example. In Pope Francis, you'll see it again in a minute from Pope Francis. It says, what we've got to do is we've got to say there is a difference here. Just because we can afford the fossil fuel doesn't mean we have a right to burn it. And this is something that's very unnatural to us. You and I grew up with the understanding that if we could afford it, we could use it. When we look at the holistic piece, we realize that that's not the case. Just because we can afford it doesn't mean we can burn it and throw the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, any more than we can bring our vegetables home and we can throw the garbage out in the street. That used to be the common thing until our society, our cities said, we can't do that anymore. Our streets are just, you can't even walk in them. So they invented things like toilets. They invented things like garbage collection. And we consider that totally the norm. We have to do that same mindset with respect to fossil fuels. The other thing we have to do is we have to adapt a mindset of becoming an advocate for creation. Creation is not something else, somebody else's. It's not out there. It's our lifeblood. It's where we get our sustenance. It's where our food comes from, where our air gets purified, where our water comes from. We have to become advocates. We don't want people throwing litter out of their car. We've got to be advocates for creation on multiple levels. The third element is that we want to become a clear voice for change. Business as usual will not do it. Staying quiet will not do it. Business as usual gives us 8 additional degrees of temperature rise by the end of this century. We're experiencing less than 2. Just imagine what 8 would feel like. Just imagine what 8 will do to our children. We have to be the Catholic voice that says there's a better way. The other voice for change is we can write our congressman. And we'll get to that in just a minute. Politicians do not create political will. People do. We need to express that political will so our politicians can respond to it. A few things from Pope Francis. A person who can afford to spend and consume more but regularly uses less heat and wears warmer clothing shows a kind of conviction and an attitude which helps protect the environment. There is a nobility in the duty to care for creation through the little daily actions, and it's wonderful how education can bring about real change in lifestyle. By what we do, we teach others. By what we do, we can be the example. Pope Francis calls us to be that example. He's got a list of things. Please read the encyclical. It's an amazing document. I've now read it 3 times, and I still get more out of it. It's beautifully written. It will challenge you in all of the ways that we live. It is life-giving document. Here's some of the things. I got to move on. How can we respond? What tools can we use? The Catholic Climate Covenant, and on your sheets there's a website, you can go to it. Take the St. Francis Pledge. What the St. Francis Pledge says is, I am willing to pray about creation. I am willing to act on creation's behalf, and I am willing to advocate. And I will do that to the best of my abilities. There's no set rule of how much you got to do. The thing is, you sign in. You say, I'm going to make this commitment. I am going to be different tomorrow than I am today with respect to my attitude about creation. Take the St. Francis Pledge. The Catholic Climate Covenant will help you do that. I'm going to be very quick on this. How not to get discouraged. I'm giving you a lot of information, a lot of bad information. Bad news coming out tonight. Okay? How not to get discouraged is a big, complex issue. The first thing is pray. Come, Holy Spirit, come. 4-word prayer. As you think about it, as you fret about it, pray. Ask the Holy Spirit to give you insight, what you should do, what you should say. Find others to journey with. If you try to attack mentally, emotionally, climate change by yourself, it will consume you. Find others to talk about it with. Find others to journey with. And the days that you're really discouraged, find one little thing you can do to help the climate. Light one candle rather than curse the darkness. Pope Francis gives us one final thing on this line too. Humanity still has the ability to work together in building our common home. All right, here's a biggie. CO2 is not red or blue. Nature does not care what the politicians say. Now, I know they think they're pretty important, but nature isn't listening. Okay? Nature doesn't care. And there's a lot of noise. There's a tremendous amount of noise out in the world about this topic. We have advantage, a real advantage, and that is the Catholic advantage. We have wise counsel to sort through the noise. Sometimes. We are Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Conservatives, and Liberals. We're all on the same planet. We all are in the same boat. And the boat is taking on water. And unless we work together, Okay? Some of the attitudes, some of the predictions that George talked about may be our children's future. We can wake up the politicians so that they can hear the Catholic voice. We can speak for our grandchildren. As Pope Francis says, if we destroy creation, creation will destroy us. Now, I've got a few good news items for us. All right? We need it. In the United States, solar and wind comprised 61% of the 2015 capacity additions. 61% of the new electrical additions that were made in the United States were solar and wind.
Not in Wisconsin.
It would probably be 64% if we could get our local government to go along. However, what it's telling us is there's will and there's a technology to make a difference. Here's another one. China's wind installation rose to a record high in 2014. 30.5 gigawatts of new projected capacity were installed in the year. 16.5 gigawatts of new solar photovoltaic. And China's coal consumption declined 4 to 5% in 2015. We talking earlier with Sister Paul Mary about the Berlin Wall falling, okay, and how some of the sisters had to come and watch it. If we can get some momentum, if we can work the momentum on Pope Francis's word and on the technology that's available, the chips are starting to come out of the wall. The wall can fall. So there is hope. The final piece of good news comes from the U.S. House of Representatives. 14 Republican House members have signed the Gibson Resolution. And that says basically that climate change is happening and we need to talk about it. That is a breakthrough. That is a breakthrough. We've got 14 Republicans that are ready to break out of the mold. The second piece is a climate caucus. And there are 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats who have joined this caucus. And their thing is that we're going to find solutions to the climate change problem in an economically responsible way. Why do I say these are groundbreaking? Because a year ago, I couldn't have made that statement. We couldn't have even come close to it. Okay? The chips are starting to fall on the wall. We've got to get out there and start swinging our hammers because politicians can see that the political will is changing. All right. Here we go. The solution. Okay, back to Pope Francis's words. There is an urgent need to develop policies so that in the next few years, emissions of carbon dioxide and other highly polluting gases can be drastically reduced. It's an amazing statement. Urgent need. Next few years, drastically reduced. And one other word in there, policy. He's saying that we as Catholics have to move to policy. How? Well, the Catholic Church right now does not propose specific solutions. However, as Catholics, we can. Okay? The Church isn't ready to give us policy, but we as Catholics can help start the fundamental change to policy. So, how do we do it? Right now there are several that are applicable to the United States. Okay? They all reflect around, no, 2 of the 3 reflect around putting a price on carbon, revenue neutral carbon fee and dividend. I'll talk to you more about that in a minute. Cap and trade is one that's being talked about and used in a lot of places. Pope doesn't like that very well. He says in some cases it's a shell game. The high polluters can keep polluting, they just buy out somebody else. The finals regulation, the EP regulation on power plants, good piece of legislation, but it wasn't a piece of legislation. And the Supreme Court's calling us on that. So that's got an issue right now. It would be great if it happened, okay? But we've got to get legislative action to make a change. We need to put a price on carbon. Burning fossil fuels is an integral part of our society and our economy. Burning fossil fuels is a major cause of global warming. So that's a paradox we've got. That's the dilemma that we're straddled with right now. If we could put a price on carbon dioxide pollution, it would help break that stalemate. It would engage the whole economy in solving our problems of pollution, of carbon dioxide. We're a very creative society. If we get the ground rules right, okay, we're going to play this game well, we're going to play the game smart. We're going to release the creativity in our society to solve this problem. But we got to get the ground rules. Carbon has to pay its full share. Right now, what we're doing is we're burning carbon and we're throwing the pollution out the window and into the atmosphere, and it's going to stay there. We're not paying anything for that disposal cost. We're not paying anything to have the garbage truck come. Most of our daily decisions are based on not energy, but on dollars. If we put a price on carbon, we can bring those two forces together. All right, I've got a 2-minute video to give you a concept of what does revenue neutral carbon fee and dividend look like.
The climate is changing.
That's the one we want.
Extreme weather is disrupting livelihoods and food supplies around the world. This is observed. This is documented. This is the scientific community's consensus. The climate is changing. Carbon emissions are driving that change. Emissions come from burning fossil fuels. So if we want to slow or even reverse the change, we must lower our fossil fuel use. By charging a fee on fossil fuels and returning that revenue to households as a dividend, we can do just that, starting a chain of positive effects. Fossil fuels become less desirable. Cleaner sources of energy become more competitive. The dividend creates millions of jobs. Carbon emissions go down, reduced air pollution saves tens of thousands of lives, and climate change is brought under control. We can make this happen, but enacting a carbon fee and dividend isn't in our hands, it's in theirs. How do we sway them? What can we do? We can use our voices to express political will and demand action. We must help our elected leaders work together. It's on us to tell them what we want as a group. Because when voices call out together, their impact multiplies. Government can respond to the will of the people, provided we tell the government what we want. And what we want is a livable world. This is what Citizens Climate Lobby works for. To empower citizens to connect with and influence their members of Congress. To spread the idea that each one of us can address climate change. Bring your voice to citizensclimatelobby.org.
Okay, so you get the drift of that? We put a continual increasing fee, predictably increasing fee on carbon. And we take all of those revenues that are collected and give them back to households on a per capita basis. And the next few slides will tell you a little bit about it. the collecting of the fees at the wellhead. You collect it as it's pumped out of the ground or it's imported across the border. You collect it once, okay? And then that price is in the fuel and it's distributed to the whole economy. So there's only one taxing point, if you will. It's in the United States, the major sources of fossil fuels is about 200 places. So it's pretty easy to implement it. The idea of distributing all of the revenues back to the households, Kathy and I will get the same rebate check that Bill and Melinda Gates get. Okay? The same. Everybody gets the same output. So this mechanism helps, supports the poor. On a percentage basis, the poor spend a higher percentage of their income for fuel. But on an absolute dollar amount, they pay less than anybody else. Everybody gets the same check back. The poor are protected. Most of the middle class is protected. Okay, the top 1/3 of our economy is not protected. Now you say that's unfair. All they got to do is reduce their carbon use. Okay, and it will be fair. Why will this help? It's because the free market then is motivated to reduce the carbon in everything. My background is engineering. I work in manufacturing of products. If I know what the cost of energy is going forward, I'm going to be able to put in place energy saving processes and energy saving things, and I'm going to reduce the amount of energy that's in my product. People in their houses are going to have the incentive to put that extra insulation in their attic. They're going to have the incentive to put solar collectors on their roof.
Are you saying that like at each of the places, the wells where they're doing fracking, that is the point where they would be charged?
Essentially,
The
yes,
fee?
but it would be charged not at John Q. Smith's well, but the pipeline that he connects it to when he tries to get it in the marketplace.
Okay.
And that's why there's only 200. 200 sources, 200 major sources in the United States for fossil fuel introduction. Okay, the fee starts at $15 a ton of carbon dioxide and increases at $10 a ton. There's a dividend that would come back. It would be $250 in the first year per person, and there's a border adjustment. If you are importing a product from a region that does not have the same cost of carbon on it, you will have to pay the carbon tax at the border. And the reason that's really important, U.S. is the #1 economy in the world. Okay? China can either put in a policy to have carbon have a price, or they can leave the money at our border. The Chinese aren't dumb. As we export things, if we are exporting into a region that does not have a price on carbon, we will actually give the manufacturer a rebate to reduce his net export cost by the amount of carbon that's in there. The reason that you want that part of it is so jobs don't leave the United States. If you put the revenue neutral carbon fee and dividend in place, in 10 years, clean energy becomes cheaper than carbon-based energy. What a difference that would make. The Regional Energy Modeling Incorporated did a very extensive regional study, economic study on this. Their conclusions are that the United States can cut its carbon emissions by 52% in 20 years. That is by far the biggest hammer that you've seen any place in the discussions. The other half of it, you hear a lot, carbon pricing kills jobs. The economic study said it does not. Because we don't remove the money from the economy, it in fact increases jobs. The jobs won't be in the oil field. They're going to be in putting insulation in your attic. The jobs won't be at the coal mines. They'll be installing solar collectors on your roof. They'll be installing more efficient processes in our manufacturing facilities. In 20 years, it will create a net of 2.8 million jobs. So it's not a job killer. It's an economic stimulus. There's another point that I don't have up here. It also reduces airborne lung problems because as we remove the carbon burning, we decrease asthma, we decrease a lot of lung-based things. Mike, maybe you can help me. It's like 20,000 lives are saved or something like that. I don't know. You don't have the exact, I've got the answer if anybody's really interested in it. All right, there we go. What do? We change our mindset and we put a price on carbon.